Hey everybody, how do you make something disappear? So it looks like it's being sort of sliced off at a certain point as it passes through this kind of like imaginary plane. Well, some folks wanted to know how to do that, and some also assumed it was done with booleans, and you could do that with booleans, but it's not the way I did it. And I'll just show you kind of how I went about accomplishing this and why I didn't use booleans, and yeah, we'll just go from there. So this is not really kind of a step-by-step tutorial, just kind of walking you through how this was done. So yeah, so let's take a look, and I want to show you just the train in isolation. And here it is going through into rather a Boolean cube. So this is when I first started the scene, and I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted the train to sort of disappear as it exited the station. And my first assumption was, okay, Booleans, that's how you do this kind of stuff. And as I got into this project, all kinds of problems came up, which I want to tell you about. So this is the train car and all the different components of the train, the wheels, the carriage, all this stuff, doors, windows. And there's a lot of things happening in this train. There's Booleans in here, there's windows and stuff and cutouts and all kinds of things, different materials, different stuff going on to make up this train. I worked really hard on it. And when it came time to apply this Boolean modifier, so here's this big cube here that it's going to be traveling into, and what happens is, I mean, actually, we'll look from the front just to give you a better sense of why this didn't work for me, at least initially. So first problem you can see is that there's a bunch of objects that don't get cut off because these are curves, and curves do not work with booleans. In fact, if you go to the modifier menu, you'll see that that booleans is not, it's not even an option here for curves. So unfortunately, that's how I made all these little railings and handles and stuff. I use curves for that just because it's handy and it looks nice and it's easy. So that didn't work. And the next problem I had, as you can see on some of these frames as it's going through the station, some of these frames have obviously like this. Let's look from the front again. This whole area here should be, you shouldn't be seeing this. So the fact that you can, and I didn't discover this until I started rendering it, and it gave me problems. I'm like, what's going on here? And I think it's just a matter of all these Booleans and all this complex geometry happening near each other, and there's the Boolean calculations are it's just struggling to solve all that reliably. And so the next step I took to solve this was to, and let me turn this next example on. I'm going to turn this off, turn on these labels. Okay, so the next one, I applied all the Booleans and all the modifiers to all the different parts of the train mesh, and I converted all these little curves to meshes so they would work with the Boolean. And now when it travels into our Boolean cube, you can see it's better. At least everything that's disappearing is supposed to be, everything that's supposed to disappear, it does so properly. But, and you can't see it here necessarily, but there's some weird shading issues that I was getting. And even though this was technically a solution, I still wasn't completely happy with this because it was a very destructive workflow. I had to commit to all these different things and keep a backup of the train. And every time I want to change something, I need to go recover that backup and make a change and reapply it and hook up all the modifiers again for the Booleans. It was just, I don't like that workflow. I like to keep things as non-destructive as possible. So this just wasn't, I wasn't quite happy with this. So I wanted another way to do that. And that's what I want to talk to you about and show you now. So let's turn on this final example. Let me just advance the train animation so where it's going outside the station a little bit. So you can see I still have all these Booleans and all these are still curves, you can see. So I was maintaining this non-destructive workflow, like I mentioned, that I liked. And also, let me switch to cycles. And also you can see that the train is still disappearing as it moves forth out of the station. So I kind of was able to accomplish this with all the with maintaining the objects and the meshes how I prefer them. And the way to do that is with shading the materials and mixing them with a transparent BSDF. So let me just show you how you do that. And instead of working on this complicated mesh here, I made a simplified version of this train. So here it is. There's just a box here with a solidify modifier and some other things. So I have a window, I have a door, so there's some booleans happening here. Here's a curve in the train. So here's a pole in the train. And then I have a little, let me just turn on transparency so you can see. And a mesh here, which is just going to be like a light to illuminate the interior of the train. So this is our basic setup. And yeah, so let's go start shading this thing, and I'll show you how this was done. So let me bring in our shader editor here. And then I need to still kind of control the timeline, so I'm going to bring in timeline as well. Where's that? Here we go. So okay, so here's our train, and it's coming. I'll just play the whole thing. So it's coming in, it's kind of lingering a little bit, and then it's leaving the station. And I want the train, anytime it passes this point forward, I want all that stuff to be just a vanish. So let's add a material to this train, and we'll call it, let's switch to material preview so we can kind of see a little bit what we're doing. Yeah, okay. So let's add a material, and let's just call this train metal or something like that. And then let's give this maybe kind of a gray metallic-y color, something like that. And then let's add this to the door as well, and let's add this to the pole as well. So we have metal all in there like that. And then for the lamp, let's add a different material. Let's call this lamp, and then I don't want this default material, so I'm just going to hit X to delete that, and then add in a emission shader. We'll just hook that up to the surface, and then we'll keep it white and give it a strength of maybe 5, say. Okay, so let's go back to our material preview. Okay, so we have our light in the train, we have our materials, and everything's kind of set up initially. So now what I want to do is, here's kind of where things get interesting. So I want to add a transparent BSDF, and then a mix shader. We'll add that in here. I'm just going to throw this right in between like that and hook up the transparent shader. And you need to be in cycles, by the way, for this to work. So I'll kind of go back and forth here. And the reason why you're seeing the light is because we're mixing kind of both of them together. If I were to move this factor all the way to the left or 0, it's just going to take this top first input, which is our metallic train metal material, or shader rather. And if the factor is 1, so just change that to 1, and now it's going to take fully the second input, which is our transparent shader. So this is the part of the train that is going to be our disappearing part. And the trick now is to find a way to inform this mix shader when to be 1 and when to be 0. So I want it to be, let me move this a little bit over here. I want the shader, this mix shader, to be all the way up to this point. I want it to be 1, and then after this end of the scene or end of the train station, I want it to be 0. How can we do that? Now, there's probably a bunch of ways to do it. I'll tell you how I did it, which is I added an empty. Where's empty? I added an empty here, and I'm going to position this. I'm looking from the top now. I'm just going to hit G and position this. It doesn't really matter where it is in the Y coordinate, but I want it to be in the X direction. I want it to just kind of define where the end of the scene is. So I just want to make sure that it's right on the edge of the platform, just to define where the edge of the scene is and where the train needs to start disappearing. So here's, this is just an empty. I'm just gonna move this up a little bit. And I'm gonna name this, we'll just name it edge or something like that. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to our rendered view and then back into our shader for the train. What I wanna do now is inform, like I said, I wanna inform this mix shader what its factor should be. And to do that, what I need to do is access the texture coordinates for this empty that we just added that's defining the edge of the platform. So in the material, I'm going to add a texture coordinate. And just a quick micro lesson on texture coordinates. There's a great, I won't go into this in detail. It's just, it would just take way too long and not really the point of this video, but you should know how these work if you don't. And if you don't, there's a great tutorial by Arendelle, which I'll link to in the description of this video, where he steps through each of these and kind of how they work. But really, I'll do my best to explain why I'm using this. So let me just add, I think it'll be clear if I add a separate XYZ node here. I'll get to that in a second. But basically, texture coordinates give you access to how an object, how a texture is applied to an object in terms of where the texture is supposed to be applied on the surface of that object. We're not going to be texturing the empty, obviously. It's just it's basically informing us where the edge of the platform is. But the texture coordinate node gives us access to its coordinate system. It's going to tell us where 0 is in this object. And here's a quick fun fact about empties. They do, it would be intuitive to think that they don't have dimensions. It's just sort of a point in space. They actually do have dimensions, just like a cube does. So it's 2 by 2 by 2, just like the default cube. So it's 2 units in each direction. That's the size of it. So with the coordinate system, the object, let me go back to the material. So we're going to be using this object option for texture coordinates. And the object coordinates, what that does is its origin is at the 0, 0, 0 point for XYZ is at the origin of the object. So here's our empty. The origin is in the center. This is the X coordinate. So this is going to be an X value of 0, and this is going to be an X value of 1. And same with in the Z. So it's 0 to 1, and in the Y, it's going to be 0 to 1 this way. So there's all these infinite values in between 0 and 1. Here's 0.5 in the middle, and likewise with all the other ones. And that's what we want to access to tell this material where to mix its transparent shader. So in this empty, I'm going to hook up the object coordinates to the separate XYZ because I'm really only interested in the X coordinate direction here. So let me, here's a moment that you'll need to, if you haven't already, go to your preferences and in your add-ons, make sure you have Node Wrangler enabled. And that will allow us to hit Control, Shift, click, and we can start to see we can separate out just one direction, one coordinate direction in our texture coordinates. So here we have, let's see, where's our empty? So here we have the coordinate system. It's showing the coordinate system of the train, and the train's origin is somewhere in here. So we're seeing all the X values as it goes in each direction. So it's going from 0 here all the way out in the positive X direction. That's why it's getting more and more white. And here it's getting more and more black. And that's how that's working. So, but we're not interested in the coordinates of the train. We're interested in the coordinates of this object here. So for our texture coordinate node, I want to set the object to the edge. And now what's going to happen is it's going to snap right to where this texture coordinate is for our empty. And I can move this around like this, and it'll affect the shading. So now we're kind of getting somewhere. And let me reposition this exactly to the edge again like that. Okay. So what we've got is a set of values in the x direction going from 0 to 1. So this is what I'm going to use to feed in the factor of this mix shader. But before I do that, I don't want, see how it's kind of like a gradation from 0 on up. And actually, technically, if we look from the top, and here's our, you can barely see it, but here's our empty right here. That's the origin point. So that's where we're getting the 0 x values. And the edge of our empty is right about here, right there. So we're going, and the edge on the negative x is over here. So all these values from here to about there are 0 to 1, and all this stuff is actually, it's actually greater than 1. And the computer display can't be more white than 100% white. So it's all white from here on forward. All this is just pure white because it's actually going beyond the edge of the empty. But we don't really care that much about that. We just want to have like a harsh stop. Like I want it to be black here and then immediately go to white after this point. And to do that, we'll need to add a node after the separate x, y, z. And that node is math node. So we'll put that in here. And then I think I want to set this to, so anything greater than 0, I want it to be just pure white. So the threshold is 0.5 right now, which is, here's our empty right here. And here's 1, here's 0, and here's 0.5. So right now this threshold is saying if it's greater than 0.5, make it true or 1 or white. If it's less than 0.5, it's false or 0 or black. So that's why we're getting this separation here. And what I want to do is just want to edge this back over to 0. I can just type in 0. So now if it's greater than 0, it's white. If it's less than 0, it's black. So that's why we added this greater than math node in there. And that's the last step I think that we need. And now I'm going to Control Shift click back on our mix shader to get us back to what the result of this material is going to be. And so for the factor now, I'm just going to feed in the result of this math node that we just added a moment ago. And now that should give us our separation for the train material to tell it when to be 1 and when to be 0. And now I want to also do that with every material that the train involves. So I only have 2 here, so this lamp needs to get that too, right? So instead of doing all that work that we just did again, I can use node groups, which is really handy. So I'm just going to clean this up just a little bit here. I guess that's really not cleaner, but whatever. So I did all this work here to figure that out. I don't want to have to redo this for every single material that's on the train. So I'm just going to make a node group out of that by selecting all these different nodes. And I'm going to hit Control G to make it a node group. And then automatically you can see I get an input that's going to be provided to this node group, and then it's going to output something. And it's already outputting a shader, and it's inputting a shader because those were the things that were connected to the nodes that I selected when I created the node group. So it kind of gave us that for free. It's already set up. So I'm inputting a shader, which is the train material, the metallic material, and then it's outputting it to the final result of this material. So that's what's going on here. And I can just name this thing something better than node group. So how do we do that? So in the properties panel, this is the N panel on the side. I'm just hitting N. And I can make this something like, I don't know, material vanisher or something like that. So this is going to be the thing that we'll add before the result of every single material. So we don't have to do all this work again. So let's select the emissive material that we added to this lamp. And what I can do, now that I've made a node group, I can just hit I can search the shader nodes and pick the one that I just created, which I think I just named it texture material vanisher, right? Yeah, so I can add that in here. And you'll see that it takes in a shader and it sends out a shader. And all I have to do is just plop that right in here and it disappears. So now if I back this up a little bit, it should follow the same rules as everything else. And that's it. That's how I accomplished this one. So now I can keep this non-destructive behavior or non-destructive workflow for the train and anything that I want to have disappear. And all I need to do is apply this to the materials of the train. And that's how I did it. So on its face, it looks the same as a Boolean, but there's kind of an interesting advantage to doing it this way, which is this. Let's say that I wanted the train, instead of just having this hard boundary as it leaves the station, let's say I wanted this to kind of fade out instead of having this abrupt change. So what I can do, this is actually pretty easy. So I could just tab back into the node group that I created, and then in here where I added this greater than math node to separate black and white, I can just mute this. And what'll happen is I can just hit M to mute that node. And what happens is it's going to take the full range of 0 to 1 values in our edge object texture coordinates and provide that full range to the factor instead of just 0 or 1. So now I'm getting this full thing, and I can move this back a little bit like that, or maybe I can even scale it along the X to sort of stretch out the distance over which that gradation occurs. So I can have the train just sort of disappear kind of in a fog rather than the way I did it in the animation. So that's just kind of an interesting thing that you can do with this method that you can't do with Booleans, because Booleans is just, it's either intersecting or it's not, or it's, it's cutting something off or it isn't. So kind of an interesting thing you can do. So yeah, that's it. That's how I did it. And yeah, if you found this helpful, let me know. Or if you like these types of videos, let me know that too. Drop a like or just send me a message or subscribe if you want to. That would be great. And yep, that's it for this one. Thanks everybody.